Welcome to the Care Right podcast, your go-to resource for all things elder care. Guiding us through this journey is Anna Kruger, the founder of Care Right Incorporated, and she has been steadfastly supporting families across the United States. Each episode brings you expert insights, innovative strategies, and practical advice, ensuring that you're well equipped to provide the best possible care for your loved ones. Expect to gain valuable knowledge, learn from real-life stories, and get inspired to take action in your own caregiving journey. So buckle up as we dive into an in-depth discussion of elder care planning and together embrace the journey of caring for aging loved ones on the Care Right podcast.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Kruger, the owner of Care Right Incorporated. We work with families all across the country developing customized aging plans. We facilitate family meetings. We find out what's working well, what's not working well, what are the goals, like staying at home, what are the resources to meet those goals, how are you going to pay for the care that you need now, but also the future care. And do you have everything in order that you should? Do you have everything buttoned up, like your estate documents? Do you have your insurance policies organized? Have you talked to your kids about your end of life wishes? Have you talked to your kids about your accounts and your passwords and all of the information that they need if they're going to become your financial power of attorney or your healthcare decision maker? So we open up the doors of conversation of topics that are usually too uncomfortable for families to do on their own, or there's just so many family dynamics that when families try to have these family meetings on their own, it just doesn't go well because of the family emotional junk that gets brought up. But as neutral family meeting facilitators, we have productive and effective family meetings in order to put that aging plan in place. Aging is confusing. Dementia progression is overwhelming. Family caregivers end up getting burned out. And it's mostly because they don't have enough supports in place because they don't have an aging plan. So Care Right's been virtual since I opened my doors, so to speak, in April of 2011. So since this podcast is being aired in April of 2022, I'm celebrating my 11th anniversary this month and my 50th birthday. So it's a big month. I'm excited to introduce Carroll Golden today. She is our podcast guest, and she's also an author, author as well for those that are watching the podcast. And she'll talk about her book in a little bit too. So Carroll Golden, I'm not going to go through all of your initials because people aren't going to know what that means anyway, but she has a lot of initials behind her name, has devoted over 2 decades to the field of extended and long-term care planning. She is the executive director of NAFA, Limited and Extended Care Planning Center, executive positions with both advisor agent distribution firms and corporate insurance carriers, interviews and client exchanges on radio and television, interactive virtual meetings, leadership roles at industry conferences, and personal experience broadened her knowledge. Carroll's passion to protect individuals and multi-generational families from psychological, health, and financial havoc caused by a lack of planning resulted in her book, How Not to Tear Your Family Apart. The story format how-to guide offers various options for multi-generational care planning and is a resource for expanding consumers and professionals' knowledge. It's available at thecaringconversation.com, and Carroll can be reached at cgolden@NAIFA, which is NAIFA.org, or csgoldentx@gmail.com, or thecaringconversation.com, or her phone number, 817-709-6859. So Carroll, we always have just like, as soon as we get on the phone with each other, we're just like all over this whole aging and family caregivers and planning topic. So we actually had a really great conversation. I'm like, we really should just hit the record button, just keep our conversation going.
I agree. I sometimes, one of the reasons I really enjoy talking with you, Annalie, is because I'm trying to be at the beginning of saying to families, I know it's a taboo topic. Your grandparents don't want to talk about it. You don't want to talk about it. And your kids have no idea what the impact would be of not talking about it. On the other hand, as a result of that, they get into a crisis situation, and my friend Anna Lee gets the call. So we're kind of a continuum of trying to give people more options, because as you age, as you need care, options begin to close out on you. And when you haven't done anything, that's when you go to Anna Lee, and she is the one that you have to use in a crisis situation. But that's never ideal.
Right.
So I developed in the book 3 simple steps. A friend of mine said to me, you're the consummate planner, but the rest of us aren't. So I said, yeah. She said, so work on developing a couple of steps that give us options of starting with family members in any one of the steps. So that's what I did. The care guide is similar to what you'll find in Annalise information, because you really don't know, you don't want to be the one in charge of making an end of life decision, especially because it might not be what your parents wanted. So the care guide kind of accumulates family history, because I'm sure you find, Annalie, that everyone in a family knows a little something, but not enough for everyone to be effective. So step 2 is a care guide. I'm sorry, that's step 1. Well, it's any order. Then the next thing I developed was called a care squad, which came from personal experience. My husband was in charge of taking care of the trust that had been developed for my mother-in-law's care. His brother felt excluded, with nobody listening to him. So they, frankly, they argued about every little thing, which I think was more stress than anything else. So I developed a care squad, because this way everyone in the family has a role. In your family, Annalie, as you described it to me, everyone pitched in. You were young, you were a first, second grader, but you felt that you had a role with your grandparents. So the care squad, what if you're not living close? The care squad assigns roles like, if you're not there, maybe you can do something with the billing, because it comes electronically. So there's always a role that the people can do. Plus, when there is something and you show up on Annalie's doorstep, it isn't 10 people showing up. Each one has something different. And then the final, can be the first step, is called a care planning team. And that's a result of my career of accumulating 15 different options that a family has if they start to plan. So I get everybody, because now we have Zoom. Here we are. So no matter where the family members are, no matter what generation they are, you can include them. Now in the book, the younger generation sits through it for their grandparents with some very good questions. But when the parents announce, we dodged a bullet with grandma and grandpa, because we had only gotten the first 2 steps done, but we were able to find something that was not insurance that was going to help, because they're not insurable anymore. So the care planning team, the millennial and Gen Xer, who are the main characters' children, they say, well, we just did grandma and grandpa. Why in the world? They panic. Is there something wrong with you, Mom, that all of a sudden you want to talk about what you're going to do? And of course, the main character, Jody, has to calm them down and say, No, but looking at the costs and expenses involved in care nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
Annalee and I quite often talk about the shortage of qualified, trained caregivers,
Yeah.
professional and non-professional. So if you want to look at options first, one of the things that the care planning team does is they look at the cost of different options as well. What's the history of that option? Has the offerings changed? And yeah, they have. So the whole idea was, here's the 3 different ways to approach the taboo topic. A lot of my financial planners simply have asked me to, do a little quick podcast like I'm doing with Annalee. And then they send the book to people,
Mm-hmm.
because maybe if you can't talk about it, you kind of give somebody the book, and then you say, are you in this book somewhere? Is this
Mm-hmm.
happening?
It's a good
to you?
conversation starter.
Yeah, and it's kind of a lot of information, because one of the things I discovered during my career is that even when you start the conversation, sometimes the advisor or the agent and the client, they don't know where to go to get more information, and the conversation stops. So one of the ways you can fund it in retirement, let's say, is an HSA, a health savings account, as opposed to a flexible savings account. Well, the HSAs, if you take money out of that during retirement for qualified long-term care expenses, it's tax-free. Who knew? So there's lots of additional information in the footnotes, or in the end notes, if it's the digital version of the book, because that allows the conversation to continue. I think even when some people get it started, if you don't continue, that's the call to Annalee.
Well,
I'm in a crisis.
right. And we were talking before we hit the record button about how when I first started Care Right, because I used to be 30 years ago, healthcare was really different. Like one person had like 7 roles. And so even though I was hired as a social worker, I was doing like 7 other jobs, right? Because that's how healthcare was back then. And so part of my job was doing marketing and doing tours, and plus the social work part of helping families adjust and helping the resident adjust, and then do discharge planning on all the paperwork and care conferences and assessments and stuff like that. But 30 years ago, things were different. Nowadays, the folks that work in these care communities, there's a marketer for each level of care, and there's a social worker for and it gets just very different now. But back then in the day, it wasn't like that. And so every day I had families in my office because there was a medical crisis. Mom fell, she broke her hip. She's the caregiver to dad with dementia. Kids fly home and they're like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? We didn't realize dad was so confused and he's not safe on his own. And mom kind of hid all this stuff from us, so the kids are blindsided. And so the tour would only take about an hour, but I was spending 2 and 3 and sometimes 4 hours at a time with each family, because I had no idea what to even ask about, what to talk about. They had for the tour, they had no idea how to make decisions, because they had like 4 tours lined up for that day. And when I would ask them what I would have considered simple questions, like, does your loved one have a living will in place, a power of attorney, who's the mortician, the inquiry form that when someone comes in to do a tour that I had to fill out.
Right.
Families were like, I don't know, we never talk about stuff like that. But there's like this teeny tiny percentage of families that would say, Annalee, we tried to get this information from mom and dad, but they gave us so much pushback that we quit trying because it started to hurt the relationship. So after 18 years of just day in and day out, same thing, families waiting until they're in a crisis to then figure out what their care options are. And they're blindsided, they're totally overwhelmed, they have no idea what they're doing. And so that's why I started Care Right. And it's like, we have to have these we need to start having these conversations sooner rather than later. And it's sad, Carroll, because 92% of my clients come to me in crisis, despite my literally 11 years of speaking engagements, podcasts, one-on-ones with families, one-on-ones with other professionals to say, don't wait until you're in crisis mode. Let's get the family on Zoom now and talk before things get really out of hand and out of control and you find yourselves in over your head. But unfortunately, that's not what people want to do. They wait until they're in crisis because they think that it's never going to happen to them, or they always think that they have more time. And I'm here to tell you as listeners, don't bank on that, because don't expect the best quality options and the best aging plan if you choose to wait until you're in crisis, because you're going to get whatever care is available. And now with the pandemic, there's such a shortage of quality. There was a shortage of quality care workers even before the pandemic, and now it's even worse. I've got clients.
That's more or less, one of the things, Annalie, that I did learn from working with you, and it shows up in the care guide. I had the grandfather resist sharing information with the rest of the family. So it was the granddaughter who said to him, Grandpa, there's a way for you to get this done and not share it. So, we're going to do this care squad thingy, and you can put it in an envelope and you can keep it to yourself. We'll use it when someone in the care squad will be assigned to getting the information. He's older. It will be in an envelope. He's not going to put it online. So the granddaughter says, Grandpa, for the information you are willing to share, why don't I do an Excel instead? And that'll just give us quick information. When Grandpa realizes that it's not invasive, that it's just inclusive, he says, well, okay. And then the Jody, it's her parents, she's the main character. She says, Dad, we all know a little something. I know your doctors because now I'm driving you to them, but I don't know dosages. I don't know some of the specialists that he's recommended. You don't need to share it. You just need to get it down for me. And if you don't want to share it with us, that's okay. At that point, he becomes more open, actually, to doing the document, and then sharing will more likely occur because he doesn't feel, this is one of my expressions again, he doesn't feel managed. He doesn't feel helped. He feels, I'm sorry, he doesn't feel managed. He feels helped. He doesn't feel handled by the family. He feels, this is my family. They care. They're not invading things. And it's one of the things that I learned because, when my husband and his brother got into battles, I kept observing that he felt excluded, and feeling excluded made him angry. So when it came to my own family, I said to my mother, share with one of us, if not all of us, and only share what you want to share. And then, do you want to partake in our little thing of Care Squad? And it was fun. She goes, oh, you mean I still get to tell some of you what to do? So, the whole idea is to try to introduce the topic without a negative story, without a scary, something bad is going to happen to you here. It's more or less the idea of we could all learn together. And that's the care planning team, because the Gen Xers said, well, I can't plan for any kind of extended care. I have 2 young children. My wife is home. She doesn't work because she's taking care of them. There is a term insurance with an endorsement that he could qualify for. So there were surprising answers that came out of the care planning team for the family. And there are some games you can play. I incorporated in the book where the children, the Gen Xer and the millennials say, well, mom, dad, you're young. You don't need to do this. So I put in a link to where you can estimate your longevity. That's an eye opener. I
Yeah.
mean, right. And then most of us who are working have healthcare through work. In retirement, you don't. So
Right.
there's a chart in there that shows how much of the money will actually have to go to Medicare, Medicare supplements, vision,
Taxes.
all of that. And
Yep.
we don't think of those things. So the whole idea between the care planning team is to learn as a group, and then less likely to show up on Annalie's door saying, we don't know what to do. There's still
No.
going to be a need for a professional because the devil's in the details. So whatever
Right.
options you're looking at, and you're still probably going to make that call to Annalie and say, look, this is what we want. How exactly do we go around doing it? But the fact is, one of my other favorite expressions, Annalie, is we retire from work, but we don't retire from a family.
Mm-hmm. One thing I share with families is because unfortunately, like I said, despite my best efforts at always trying to get families to plan ahead and let's talk about the good and the bad and the ugly of aging now before you're in crisis. I always say, you would hope the aging process brings families together, but I'm here to tell you that it often does not. And I don't know about what you're seeing, but I've been a social worker for 30 years, and it just seems like earlier in my career, families got along a lot better because they lived close by to each other and they worked as a team to help with aging parents. So like when I first started as a social worker, I could easily go to Ethel and Marvin's house and the kids could easily gather around the kitchen table because they lived in the same county. But as families started moving apart from each other, if they didn't invest the energy, the time, the effort, and the resources in maintaining relationships with each other as siblings, when they started moving away, then when there's that medical crisis, they have to get reacquainted. I've got clients that their kids have never met. So like their niece and nephews have never met, their cousins have never met, their kids'
Right.
kids
Yeah.
have never met.
Yeah.
And that's why I went virtual right away when I opened up my business, because families just don't live near each other. And so the only way I can facilitate their family meeting is at that time I used Skype because that's what we had. But that's the only way to facilitate family meetings was to use technology. And so thankfully when the pandemic hit, I wasn't like scrambling like many other people were, because they were still old school. They were still trying to meet people face to face. I'm like, that is so old school. Like you need to get in the game here. So
but you know what I have found, even though my family lives in 3 different states, none of us.
mine too.
However, even with families that I have worked with where the kids do live, half hour, an hour away from one another, we are using Zoom or WebEx or whatever they have, because we are an overly busy society. So for them to get in the car and go over to grandma or grandpa or a cousin's house, it's usually, or at least in my family, it's for a celebration. That's not the appropriate time to start talking about, have you got a will? So what I found was, for this care planning team, they set up on the calendar regular meeting times, because everyone nowadays books things into their calendar. So for the care planning team, for the families that, even if they live close by, but the key is the ones who don't, they have been asked. If they go, hey, doesn't fit with what they're not going to be like my husband's brother-in-law who feels so much resentment. They're more likely to feel grateful that someone is handling something that they don't have time, energy, or it disturbs them too much to think about the end game. So the whole idea of pandemic did 2 things for us. One, it showed everybody they don't want to dump their relatives, or even in a high-end facility.
Right.
And Two, they can communicate if they, and as I said, I don't care where they start, but at least if they have a plan to
Mhm.
get on once a month, say hi and say, okay, so I assigned each person a topic to look into, just one, because everyone is busy. Speaking
Yep.
of busy, how are we doing with time?
We've got a couple minutes left.
So I think for the most part, every family is going to be different. Every relationship is different, but there is enough, I think, ways to move forward that you're right. I have spent my whole career with this topic, with this taboo topic, trying to find a way to say to families, start around the edges if you don't want to start right into the pie.
Mhm.
Just take a little bit and get a little more comfortable. Use technology, book it on a calendar so that when the time is up, conversation can stop. But the thoughts, those will continue.
I love your title. Carroll Golden is the author of How Not to Tear Your Family Apart. 3 simple steps to start critical conversations and help your family and aging parents plan a financially stable future. I love the title of your book. It's so critical. Hopefully those that are listening to this leverage this podcast and say, you know, family, I listened to this really interesting podcast that kind of hit home for us because we've never had any kind of conversations about the what ifs of aging. And this podcast just kind of woke me up to say, what is our actual plan? How are we going to manage as a family and as a team? And how are we going to pay for the care that's going to be needed at some point down the road, especially knowing that with the pandemic, the cost of care has went up 50 to 60%. So home care before the pandemic was anywhere from, depending on where you are in the country, $21 to $28 an hour. I have clients now paying upwards of $60 an hour, and they simply can't staff short shifts, like 4 or 5 hour shifts. So the more care that you need at home, the more it's going to cost, but the more likelihood that you might be able to get a companion to help you take care of yourself at home. So I mean, the time is now. So anybody listening to this, the time is now to start the conversations with your family. If your family's not able to do these types of conversations on your own, that's okay. You are certainly not alone. Every single family that comes to me has been unable to have these family meetings on their own. It's overwhelming. It's scary. Like you said, Carroll, these are taboo topics. Sometimes people are afraid if they talk about it, it's going to trigger an event. Like if we talk about death or dying or end of life or those types of things, that's going to like somehow happen now because you brought it up. So, I'm a resource for all of you listening. Carroll's obviously a resource. If you're a financial planner listening to this and you're like, oh, we want to learn more about this, you've got Carroll already as a resource. I've created, and my business partner, Bob Mauderstock, we've created for financial planners, the Elder Planning Specialist Certification Program. So if this is interest to you as a financial planner or insurance person, look me up and, reach out to me. If you're a family, a consumer listening to this and say, you know what, we need some help with this. You've got Carroll's book here. And then I also wrote a book called The Invisible Patient, The Emotional, Financial, and Physical Toll of Family Caregiving. Mine's on Amazon as well. So if you want to look at that, you're welcome to. So Carroll, it's always a delight. Time always flies, unfortunately, when we get together though.
True. It's true. It does, because
I don't think anybody will find 2 more passionate people about aging, planning, and avoiding family caregiver burnout.
exactly. And I think in some cases, if you approach it as a positive, I think one of the ways that I have found that families who haven't spoken about it are now able to do, retirement used to be a 9 to 5 quit the job and retire. Now there's a third stage of retirement. First one, the freedom, you traveled, you did this, that, and the other thing. The second one, you figured out, okay, so we're not going to travel as much, etc. But longevity is keeping us alive very long.
Mm-hmm.
So the conversation doesn't have to be about extended and long-term care. It
Right.
can be about retirement. I'm doing a presentation on the effect in retirement of needing care. So don't talk about extended care or long-term care. Talk about mom, dad, you're enjoying retirement. Tell me a little bit about what that's going to look like as you continue. And then go to the care planning team thing. So just trying to get the conversations going.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, Carroll, thank you for taking the time this morning. I've got to hop off because I've got another call to jump on. But thank you so much. And we will be in touch soon, okay?
Okay.
All right, take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning into the Care Right podcast. We hope today's discussion has provided you with valuable insights. If so, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with others who might find it helpful. Remember, Care Right is more than just a podcast. It's a community dedicated to supporting family caregivers with comprehensive care planning, crisis management, and resources for every stage of aging. Stay connected with us for future episodes as we continue to explore essential topics in aging planning, elder care, and financial planning. Until next time, take care, plan wisely, and remember, you're not alone in your caregiving journey.